Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. As was mentioned, it is slightly rhetorical, so a rhetorical cliche to start a discussion by questioning its very premise. But when I'm asked to speak about raising the cap on tuition fees representing NUS, I'm actually left with very little choice. The question makes two key presumptions. Firstly, that the cap should be lifted, not lowered. And secondly, that tuition fees are indeed the best way to get a graduate contribution to the cost of education. But what's even more stark is what this question leaves out. Who this debate is actually talking about. Let's be clear, postgrads pay tuition fees. Part-time students pay tuition fees. But they're not who this question is referring to. The question presumes we're talking about, and therefore only interested in, the typical 18 to 21 full-time undergraduate. And it's this kind of thinking that has proved all too problematic in the past. To limit discussion to one particular group of students studying one particular mode is to needlessly limit our conception of higher education in Wales. And this leads us to a situation where postgrads and part-timers are yet again ignored in favour of undergraduates. But before we talk about how the HE system should operate, what it should look like and how it should be funded, surely we should first be clear on what its purpose is and what we want it to achieve. I believe higher education should be about creating a fairer society by improving social mobility and providing social capital. I believe higher education should be about strengthening the economy through localised spending, the provision of research and the creation of spin-out businesses. And I also believe that higher education should be about providing flexible responses to the skills needs of the people in Wales. Talking about a narrow band of students and a narrow form of higher education does not achieve these aims. And what also doesn't achieve these aims is focusing the entire debate around a narrow question of tuition fees, particularly around the cap. Student support and funding in its totality is far more than the tuition fee grant and loan. Ultimately, students do not drop out of university because of their fee loan. They drop out of university because they can't afford to live. But I'll come back to that. First, let's answer the question that this debate is framed. Is it time for the tuition fee cap to be lifted? Well, absolutely not. I would say that. Why? For some half-baked idea of competition that has yet to actually materialise. The introduction of 9K fees was meant to create a market, to create competition, to create consumerism. The neoliberal dream, it did not happen. There is no market in education. The average fee in 2013 is a little over 8,500. 3 out of 4 institutions are charging the maximum fee for all or some of their courses. Indeed, the experiment did fail. When it comes to price fixing, supermarkets and the price of milk have nothing on universities. We already have some of the highest tuition fees in the developed world, OECD figures placing us marginally ahead of the US average. And what do we have to show for it? It was recently announced, and in the press today, that the Westminster government will find that it saved little or no money with a trebling of fees. No saving of public money, but fees trebled. This is outrageous. We should be absolutely outraged. The accounting model used in this situation has been described as akin to the dark arts used by the bankers before the crash. And that wasn't said by my socialist father, that was said by someone from number 10. So what are our options? Do we turn a blind eye to the omni-shambles in England and move forward determined to make the same mistakes? Scrap the fee grant entirely and watch as we charge students 3 times as much money but save the public purse very little? Or remove the tuition fee cap entirely just so more students cannot pay even more money? And why? So our universities can get short-term investment of cash regardless of the long-term consequences. This doesn't seem sensible to me. But of course, while Welsh universities can charge 9,000, Welsh students pay less. NUS Wales supports the fee grant, but don't get me wrong, it is in some ways problematic. It's blunt. It doesn't target specific groups and it isn't spent strategically. And it's expensive, possibly unsustainably so. But indeed the principle is sound. But even if the fee grant were to be removed, the subsidy, or the removal of the subsidy, would be no quick fix to a lack of money in the sector. It would take years for the current students to move through the system. There would be no sudden cash investment. And even if there was spare cash to be made, there's nothing to say that the education sector would reap those benefits. It would not necessarily go into the coffers of HEFCU. Perhaps we need a more nuanced and strategic policy approach. A support system that helps students study inside and outside of Wales, but based on their financial needs and or the availability of courses. This is the policy that was passed by NUS Wales only 2 weeks ago. And while everyone talks about fees and the fee grant, we're ignoring the even more pressing issue: day-to-day living costs. According to NUS Wales' Pound in Your Pocket research, 70% of students are worried about future levels of debt. 1/3 have seriously considered leaving their course due to financial difficulties, and over half regularly worry about meeting basic living expenses. Right now, students in Wales are choosing between a decent meal and a textbook, heating or a field trip, a dentist appointment or equipment. True widening access is more than just getting disadvantaged people into higher education. It's about keeping them there, quite literally staying the course. Now, higher education in Wales is resilient. It's survived and thrived and will continue to do so. But now is the time for us to decide what we truly want from our education system and how we want that to be delivered. We cannot allow postgraduate provision to remain, as the Centre Forum labelled it, an exclusive golf club. We cannot allow the continued part-time provision underfunding that fails to meet the needs of those who rely on it: carers, parents, disabled, those in full-time work. And we must not let our students, regardless of mode or study, spend their education fraught with worry over basic living expenses and debt. And I don't want an education system that is foolishly constructed on the never-never, on money that will never be repaid. So these are the challenges. There are many, budgetary and otherwise. But we must think outside the box. We must look about how we apportion what funding we do have and how we ask our students to contribute, and indeed they should contribute. We need to explore what powers we already have in Wales to radically change our approach to higher education, and what powers we might want to call for so that we can implement the best deal for students, university and for Wales. If the sticker fee price is a barrier, if the concept of loans and debt is a barrier, then how do we get around them? Would a graduate tax provide a fairer means for graduate contribution? Quite possibly. It could retain many of the best features of the loan system, income contingent repayments, for example, whilst ensuring the money remained within the funding council to distribute and leave a policy. I'm aware I've only answered one question and posed a lot more, but that's what we need right now, to ask questions, because we need to construct an education system built to last, not another quick fix, not another jury-rigged system that solves one problem but creates 10 more. I want an education system where the question of this debate wouldn't have been, should we lift the cap? But are we actually and genuinely creating an education system that promotes social justice and is the engine that drives our economy forward?